Well, it was, as we were saying yesterday, unbelievably close. But the pole, deservedly so, I think, went to Lando Norris in the McLaren-Mercedes. Absolutely brilliant lap by Lando. As he said afterwards, the perfect lap. I don't know whether the perfect lap has ever been driven in the history of Formula One, but let's give it to Lando on this occasion, as near perfect as you can get it. And just superb in that lovely rhythm that he's found, well, ever since he took the lead in Miami and won that Grand Prix, really. We saw signs of it before that, but just beautiful when he gets into that rhythm, just fabulous to watch. And it was Max Verstappen that Lando beat to the pole. And that makes it all the sweeter, of course, from a driver's perspective. Afterwards, unsurprisingly, Lando looking as if he just achieved something pretty big. And Max, as befits a driver who's been doing the sort of winning that he has over the last few years, looked pretty sanguine in Parc Fermé. Of course, the big deal is the race tomorrow. And the race tomorrow will feature two very different cars. The McLaren-Mercedes, unbelievably good in Sector 2, as I said yesterday. The Red Bull RB20, as I said yesterday, incredibly good, Sectors 1 and 3. So under the heading of Barcelona historically being the scene of unbelievably close qualifying, not so much racing, but in recent years, quite good overtaking, that's for sure. But certainly qualifying, leading up to qualifying. Let's have a look at the difference between those two fastest laps in Q3 between Lando Norris on the pole and Max Verstappen, who qualified second. So let's have a look at those three sectors. You see the sectors 1, 2 and 3 on the left, and you can see the total time that each driver did through those sectors. And you can see how that pole lap for Lando carved itself out, but you can see how close it was. So Sector 1, Max Verstappen, and I'm going to bring up here now a second graphic, and we can just go back from one to the other. Sector 1, Max Verstappen was quicker by 0.014. So that's across the start-finish line, and that's to some extent reflecting how good the Red Bull is out of that last corner. Max 296, Lando Norris 294 across the start-finish line. Then Max got a tow, inadvertently I think, from his teammate Sergio Perez, and as he went through the speed trap just before the braking area into turn 1, he's doing 328, which was 4 kilometres an hour quicker than he'd been at any stage of qualifying, even though Red Bull have got their top speed now about the same as McLaren, a little bit slower than Mercedes, but nonetheless in the ballpark compared with how they were on Friday morning, as I said yesterday in the video. So Max is now doing 328. He's got a massive tow, and it looks like, assuming he keeps the lap clean, he's going to get the pole. And let's have a look at what Lando did through the speed trap on his quickest lap, which was just after Max's. In fact, they were both on it, kind of, but Max was doing it first. 323, and he had to pass Esteban Ocon before turn 1. Ocon going pretty slowly, and Lando not even therefore as quick as he had been at another stage in qualifying. He's about 2 kilometres an hour slower, so it wasn't a great speed trap time for Lando Norris. Now we go back into Sector 1. Nonetheless, Lando made up a lot of that difference in Sector 1, and that, I think, accounted to some extent for his pole. He's only 0.014 behind Max as they go into Sector 2, and here, particularly out of turn 5, which is the downhill tight left hand, and then 6 and 7 into 9, 6, 7 and 8 into 9. Lando is unbelievable. He's actually setting purple times there, so quickest of all, as distinct from just going green, which is basically what Max was doing until he got to Sector 3. So there is Lando showing how good that McLaren is now in terms of traction, slow speed turn in, and all the things we've been saying about McLaren ever since Miami, really. And that's a significant advantage he had in Sector 2. And so now we get to Sector 3, which is basically the Red Bull sector, but it does include turn 9, where they're pretty similar. But going into the braking area for the beginning of Sector 3, it's Max Verstappen who gets it absolutely right and nails that final sector, particularly that last corner, where the Red Bull is so good over that bump just before the apex, maybe because they're running slightly higher ride heights or can get away with the slightly higher ride heights, and finishes at Sector 3, 0.105. So he's got an advantage of 0.1 in Sector 3. Lando's got an advantage of 0.1 in Sector 2. They're about the same through Sector 1, even though Max did have the benefit of that tow. And it all evens out to the difference down to a hundredth and a thousandth of a second on those two margins. And Lando was a little bit quicker through Sector 2 than Max was through Sector 3 compared with Lando. And that's what it came down to, 0.020. I think you can look at this in a number of ways. One is that if Max hadn't had that tow, the difference probably would have been bigger. Two, in the race tomorrow, Sector 3, and particularly that last corner, and also the slight advantage that Red Bull have in terms of top speed, even without a tow, is going to be a very nice thing for Max Verstappen to have as the tyres start to go away, as they start to grain a little bit. That's going to be a really big factor. And I can't help thinking that in the planning of the setup for the Red Bull, they would have been saying, okay, Max, we'll give you more downforce in Sector 2 and you're going to be really good in Sector 2, but you might be struggling Sector 3, you might be struggling in terms of top speed. And he would have said, no, give me Sector 3 and top speed. That's what I need for the race. And don't forget, of course, he is going to be in DRS if he's behind Lando in the early stages of the race. And it's quite a long straight here. And you can do quite an effective DRS pass into Turn 1. None of that is to detract from McLaren, because I don't think they had as many cards with which to play as Red Bull with the McLaren. But they used the cards that they had incredibly well around Lando Norris. Just a superb job. And imagine if he'd had a tow, a proper tow. He didn't, because although his teammate Oscar Piastri made it into Q3, he never really looked that convincing, not as unconvincing as Sergio Perez in the other Red Bull, but he never looked particularly at home with the car, as I said yesterday. And he didn't run at all, presumably because they were just saving tyres for the race, I would guess. He didn't run at all in Q3, so Lando definitely didn't have the benefit of any sort of tow. But he did pass Ocon, and it didn't help him. It was probably more of a turbulence thing, or maybe even having to go offline when he got him. So that was it. That was the difference between the two of them, as small as it is. And I think that teased the race up beautifully. Two very different cars in the way they're doing, and the way they're producing the results around the Barcelona lap. Two very different drivers as well. Max using slightly shorter corners than Lando Norris. Lando has longer corners, but a beautiful touch, as I've been saying for several years now. A wonderful touch, and he has that. And he has that ability to balance a car right on the edge when the tyres are starting to go away. He does a really good job. Call it tyre management. I just call it finesse. But yeah, really, really good job by both of them. And so a quick look at the rest of the grid. P3, Lewis Hamilton, really, really well-deserved lap as well, just as Lando's was. Great lap by Lewis. And the great thing was that George Russell put in a great lap as well, a very, very good lap. And Lewis beat him by the tiniest of margins, beat him by 0.002. And that's very satisfying, I imagine, for Lewis, because it's one thing to beat George if George doesn't get the car quite right. It's another thing to beat George when George is absolutely on it and pretty happy with everything, and he beats him by 2,000ths of a second. Really good drive by Lewis Hamilton, and a good performance by Mercedes all round to beat the two Ferraris. Yeah, still behind Red Bull and McLaren, but definitely a reason to say getting better increment by increment. Although for Lewis it was touch and go in Q2 because he'd already used too many sets of soft tyres, new sets. And so they sent him out at the beginning of Q2 on the first run on used tyres, and it was dodgy. He was almost not going to make it. They put him on the new set for the second run in Q2, put him out relatively early just to make sure he had no issues with traffic. And Lewis delivered, did a great job. And I think went to P1 or P2 at that point in getting through into Q3. But it was a nervy few minutes, I think, for Mercedes. 5th and 6th, the two Ferraris. In the end, Charles Leclerc slightly quicker than Carlos Sainz. The difference there was 0.005. So just talking tiny differences. Just looking at the speed trap here, quickest in a straight line through the trap was George Russell 3.29, which would suggest some sort of tow. Lewis Hamilton 3.27, Max Verstappen with that tow 3.28, Lando Norris 3.25, and you could say with Ferrari doing 3.27, 3.27, both cars, so there's no tow there, that is what they're doing, quicker in a straight line than McLaren. That is a pure indication that McLaren generate more downforce than Ferrari, and that is why around Barcelona the McLaren, driven by Lando Norris, is quicker than the two Ferraris. So Ferrari have now got a reasonably good top speed, reasonably beneficial around Barcelona, not massively, but it's costing them against the McLaren in terms of grip and balance, and that may manifest itself tomorrow in increased tyre load, tyre energy, tyre heat, but nonetheless it puts them in a better position than we saw in Canada. So Ferrari, just to recap, last year very good in terms of top speed, very good at high speed braking, not a lot of downforce because they were so good in top speed. Now they got more downforce. They've lost some top speed, but they haven't got as much downforce as McLaren, and they've still got too much top speed, if you like, against McLaren, if that's their yardstick in which to fight Red Bull. 7th and 9th, the two Alpine Renaults. Flavio will be pleased about that. Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon both doing a very good job in that car. 8th, Sergio Perez, a desultory Sergio Perez, who looks completely lost at the moment in terms of where his speed has gone. It's gone, I mean, just watching him on the circuit, it's just classic Sergio, just using the tyres too much. Too many unnecessary transitory curves, particularly out of 2 into 3, loading the tyres up more, just asking more of the car everywhere compared with Max. And it's strange because we have so many quotes from Sergio saying, I've been working really hard, I've been working with the engineers on the simulator, doing this, doing that. And you wonder if they ever are saying to him, look what Max Verstappen is doing with this car. And we don't mean numbers here, we don't mean speeds, we don't mean throttle input, we don't mean pedal input. What we mean is look at the graphic on the circuit, look at what he's doing, look where he's positioning the car, look where he's beginning his turn-in point, look how he's going in on braking. I wonder whether they do that. I'm sure they don't. I'm sure they just lock themselves into data, and you cannot in any way expect Sergio Perez to be able to adopt the style of Max Verstappen purely by looking at data or trying to drive to data. It isn't going to happen, as is clearly the case. And finally, as I say, Oscar Piastri, he didn't go out at all in Q3, but yeah, made it through. A bit of a strange weekend for Oscar so far, given how good, obviously, the McLaren is around here in terms of grip and balance. The Aston Martins failed to make it through into Q3. No real surprise after everything I was saying yesterday. They didn't look as if they were going to do that. Valtteri Bottas did a good job in the Stake Sauber, qualified 12th, as did Nico Hülkenberg. Good job, that is, in the Haas Ferrari, 13th. And Guan Yu Zhou, not too bad either in the other Stake Sauber, showing that team's upgrades certainly have some benefit. We haven't seen it in the last couple of races, but here in Barcelona starting to look a little bit better. So yeah, that was qualifying. It's going to be a fascinating race, I think, because it's going to be about tyres. It could even be a two-stop strategy, depending on the way it goes with safety cars. And I think Max does have a bit of a problem tomorrow because Lando is so good in his inputs and so good in his rate of loading the car. But if anybody's going to do a good job with tyre management tomorrow, it's going to be Lando Norris, and Max has to bear that in mind. From Max's point of view, he's got the advantage through the last corner, which leads on to the straight where there's DRS, and that's a really important point. And that'll be what he'll be taking with him into the race tomorrow. He knows that through Sector 2, Lando's going to have the advantage. But what can he do through Sector 2 anyway? There's not going to be any overtaking there. It's just going to be a question of looking after the tyres and running near enough to Lando to be able to stay in the tow, in the DRS, but not so near that he too quickly takes the energy out of his tyres. And that's going to be the balancing act that Max has to play tomorrow. So it'll be good. And it's a long run down to that first corner as well. We've seen in the F2 and F3 races already some of the things that can happen. The unbelievable shunt in the F3 race when two teammates were going down, with one of them with a DRS pass going into turn 1, and the guy leading just sort of moved slightly to the right, and the teammate went up on the grass on the inside and then hit the other guy, punctures this, that. I mean, I can't imagine, hopefully, touch wood, Lando and Max are going to stay out of all that tomorrow. They're pretty level-headed, I think. Speaking of which, there was some very odd things going on today. There was a Lance Stroll-Lewis Hamilton incident in FP3, which Lewis immediately got on the radio to apologise for, saying, I didn't see him at all. And Lance unnecessarily, I mean, I don't know if he lost at mid-corner. It looked like coming out of turn 5. It looked like, which is the slow left-hander, it looked like he either lost it in the middle and got a bit of understeer and hit and lightly touched Lewis, was on the outside, who obviously thought was on his line, or he just missed him, one of the two. That, to me, it was a bit odd. That was a bit unnecessary, really. We're talking FP3. Once FP3 was basically over and they were doing these laps onto the grid for the practice starts, it was an incredible drama between Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc. Charles thinking that Lando was... I think Charles was obviously still on a quick lap and Lando had slowed right down. And Charles looks like he deliberately drove into Lando, just touched him. And Lando got on the radio straight away. He just drove into me and I think I've got car damage. And it was quite a big... If you watch the onboard, you can see his hands on the wheel sort of doing that as Charles hits the car. Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris doing that. I couldn't believe it. I don't know. Maybe Charles at that point... I don't know. Charles gets fairly steamed up, doesn't he? Quite emotional driver. And that's possibly one of the things that he still needs to work on in terms of not getting too wound up about things. Lando's the opposite end of the spectrum, just completely laconic about it all. Oh, I think I've got some car damage. He hit me. And maybe it was Lando's fault, but this running into one another is got to stop straight away. I thought it all stopped when Sebastian Vettel got. Well, he didn't get. That's always been my point, actually. If I think about it, Vettel never got a severe enough penalty for crashing into Lewis Hamilton's car behind the safety car in Baku that year. And because he only got, I don't know, a fine or something, it's kind of, everyone's forgotten about that. And Seb is who he is today, this global icon. But, it happened, and the penalty wasn't enough. And we had 2 incidents today that need to be jumped on straight away, in my opinion. Just totally unnecessary. Well, uncalled for, and shouldn't be allowed. Stamp it out. Anyway, there we are. Good qualifying session. Looking forward to the race tomorrow now. That dragged down to the first corner. A big thanks to our partners, to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and of course to our friends at Track Ninja. You can read about all those companies in the description below, and please do all you can to support. In the meantime, take care. See you tomorrow.